At the company meeting, the CEO's son smirked at me and announced, "This place runs like a retirement home. That ends today. We don't reward slackers," before firing me. I just smiled because he had no idea I owned their main supplier. Let me back up and explain how a 20-year veteran with a mechanical engineering degree and forensic auditing certification ended up in this position. More importantly, how Spencer had just triggered a response from someone with a professional network, financial resources, and strategic expertise to systematically dismantle everything he thought he controlled. I'm Todd Warner, 48, Senior Operations Manager at Dynacorp Manufacturing, earning $95,000 annually with comprehensive benefits and stock options. My background includes mechanical engineering from state, 6 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, and 15 years building supply chain relationships that keep this company's $12 million annual revenue flowing. Spencer Harrison, 26, is the CEO's son who just returned from his MBA program with zero manufacturing experience and a trust fund that's convinced him business is just PowerPoint presentations and golf course handshakes. What Spencer didn't understand was that I had been systematically documenting every operational inefficiency, vendor relationship, and supply chain vulnerability for the past 5 years as part of my continuous improvement reporting. My engineering background had taught me to analyze systems and identify critical failure points, while my auditing certification meant I understood exactly how to leverage financial relationships for strategic advantage. The crisis had been building since Spencer arrived 3 weeks ago. He'd immediately started questioning established processes, suggesting we optimize vendor relationships by switching to cheaper suppliers and pushing for what he called organizational restructuring to eliminate redundancy. In Spencer's mind, anyone over 45 was dead weight, and anyone earning above median salary was overpaid. But Spencer had made a critical error in his analysis. He'd focused entirely on payroll costs without understanding the operational relationships that generated revenue. While he saw me as an expensive middle manager, I was actually the primary interface between Dynacorp and Mid-State Plastics, our exclusive supplier for custom injection molding components that represented 70% of our product line. Here's what Spencer's MBA program hadn't taught him about supply chain management. Mid-State Plastics had been struggling financially for 18 months. Their previous major client had canceled a $2 million contract, leaving them with excess capacity and mounting debt. When their owner, Bill Foster, approached me last fall about potentially losing the Dynacorp contract due to cash flow problems, I didn't just maintain our purchasing agreement. I personally guaranteed a $150,000 line of credit through my connections at First National, restructured their payment terms to net 15 instead of net 30, and helped them secure a small business administration loan that kept them operational. Bill Foster didn't just see me as a customer contact. He saw me as the person who saved his family business, his employees' jobs, and his 30-year reputation in precision manufacturing. That level of loyalty isn't quantified in Spencer's spreadsheets, but it was about to become his most expensive education. My strategic response to Spencer's termination began the moment HR finished their organizational restructuring speech. Instead of cleaning out my desk in defeat, I spent my final hour in the building downloading every vendor contact file, supply chain specification document, and operational timeline I'd developed over 2 decades. My engineering background had taught me that preparation prevents failure, and I was about to test that principle on a corporate scale. That afternoon, I drove directly to Mid-State Plastics facility, where Bill Foster greeted me with the kind of concern you'd show a family member facing crisis. When I explained that Dynacorp had terminated me as part of cost-cutting measures, Bill's reaction was immediate and decisive. "Todd, without you, we never would have survived last year's client loss," he said, reviewing our payment history on his computer. "Dynacorp owes us $340,000 in outstanding invoices, and they've got standing orders worth another $280,000 over the next 6 weeks. What do you want me to do?" This was the moment my strategic preparation paid off. During my documentation review, I'd identified that Mid-State operated under a standard commercial supply agreement with Dynacorp that included a 30-day termination clause, but also specified that outstanding orders could be canceled if the supplier deemed the buyer financially unstable or operationally unreliable. Spencer's restructuring had just provided the operational unreliability justification. "Bill," I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared during my drive over, "I want to buy a controlling interest in Mid-State Plastics. I've got $180,000 in 401k funds available for immediate withdrawal, $95,000 in savings, and access to a $200,000 line of credit through my engineering consulting LLC. I can close this transaction within 72 hours. Bill stared at me for a full minute before responding. "You're serious. You want to buy my company to get back at the people who fired you." "I'm serious about acquiring a profitable manufacturing business with established customer relationships and growth potential," I replied. "The fact that it gives me leverage over people who underestimated my strategic value is just a secondary benefit." We spent the next 4 hours reviewing Mid-State's financial records, asset inventory, and customer contracts. The numbers worked perfectly. Mid-State's annual revenue was $1 million, with gross margins around 35%. Dynacorp represented 65% of their business, but Bill had been actively pursuing diversification to reduce dependency risk. With my operational expertise and financial backing, we could expand capacity and develop new customer relationships while maintaining leverage over my former employer. By Friday afternoon, I owned 60% of Mid-State Plastics, with Bill retaining 40% and continuing as operational manager. My first executive decision was to implement a new vendor agreement with Dynacorp that doubled component prices, required payment within 10 days instead of 30, and included penalties for canceled orders. The agreement would take effect immediately for all new orders, and existing orders would transition to new pricing within 2 weeks. Spencer's education in supply chain reality began Monday morning when he discovered that Mid-State had canceled all pending orders and demanded immediate payment of outstanding invoices before resuming production. When he called to complain, Bill Foster's response was professionally devastating. "Mr. Harrison, Mid-State Plastics has been acquired by new ownership with different operational priorities. If Dynacorp wants to continue our supply relationship, you'll need to negotiate terms with our new majority owner, Todd Warner." The silence on Spencer's end lasted almost 30 seconds before he managed to stammer out a response. "Todd Warner? That's impossible. We fired him last week." "Mr. Harrison," Bill replied, "Todd Warner saved my company last year when we were facing bankruptcy. When you terminated the one person at your company who understood our operational relationship, you created a business opportunity for someone who recognized the Mid-State's strategic value. Mr. Warner is now my business partner and primary decision-maker for all customer contracts." Spencer's next call was to me, which I answered on the first ring with professional courtesy that must have been infuriating. "Todd Warner, Mid-State Plastics Business Development. How can I help you?" "This is insane, Todd. You can't just buy our supplier and hold us hostage." "Spencer, I'm not holding anyone hostage," I replied calmly. "I've made a strategic business acquisition that positions Mid-State for expanded growth and profitability. If Dynacorp wants to maintain our supply relationship, we're happy to negotiate terms that reflect current market conditions and operational realities." "What are your terms?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. I pulled out the contract I'd spent the weekend preparing with my attorney. "Component prices increased by 85% to reflect current material and labor costs. Payment terms changed to net 10 with 2% penalties for late payments. All orders require 50% deposit up front, and we maintain the right to prioritize production based on customer payment history and relationship strength." Spencer's response was exactly what I'd expected from someone whose business education came from case studies instead of operational experience. "That's robbery. We'll find another supplier." "That's certainly your prerogative," I said. "However, I should mention that your current production schedule requires approximately $280,000 in components over the next 6 weeks to fulfill existing customer commitments. Mid-State is the only facility within 200 miles with the specialized injection molding equipment and quality certifications your specifications require. Alternative suppliers would need 8-12 weeks minimum to tool up for your component requirements, assuming they have available capacity. The silence that followed told me Spencer was finally beginning to understand the operational complexity he'd dismissed as bureaucratic inefficiency. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I need to discuss this with my father. Can you give us 24 hours to review?" "Of course," I replied. "But I should mention that we've got other potential customers interested in our expanded capacity. TechFlow Industries in Milwaukee has been requesting quotes for components very similar to your specifications. If Dynacorp isn't interested in our partnership terms, we'll need to prioritize production for customers who value our operational reliability." Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from CEO Robert Harrison himself, Spencer's father, and the man who'd built Dynacorp from a small machining shop into a $12 million manufacturing operation. His tone carried the weight of someone who just discovered that his son's cost-cutting measures had handed strategic control to a competitor. "Todd, Bob Harrison, I understand there's been some miscommunication about supply arrangements. Can we meet to discuss this situation?" "Certainly, Mr. Harrison. I'm available this afternoon if convenient." We met at Harrison's office, where I arrived carrying a leather portfolio containing Mid-State's operational capabilities, my strategic plan for business expansion, and alternative contract terms I'd prepared for this exact conversation. Harrison looked older than I remembered, and I could see the stress lines around his eyes that come from watching your son make expensive mistakes. "Todd, I want to apologize for how your termination was handled," he began. "Spencer was overzealous in his restructuring recommendations, and I should have provided better oversight." "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the apology, but my termination actually created an excellent business opportunity," I replied. Mid-State Plastics needed strategic investment and operational expertise. I needed a business acquisition that leverages my supply chain knowledge and relationship management skills. The timing worked perfectly for both objectives. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying me with the careful attention of someone who just realized he'd been outmaneuvered by a superior strategist. "What would it take to restore our previous supply arrangement?" I opened my portfolio and slid a document across his desk. "Mr. Harrison, our previous arrangement was based on Dynacorp's loyalty to Mid-State during our capacity challenges. That loyalty was demonstrated through operational support, flexible payment terms, and long-term commitment to our partnership. When your organization terminated the primary relationship manager and indicated plans to seek alternative suppliers, that partnership foundation was damaged." Harrison reviewed the document, which outlined 3 potential contract structures ranging from premium pricing with standard terms to competitive pricing with expanded collaboration requirements. The most favorable option included a consulting agreement that would bring me back as Mid-State's strategic liaison to Dynacorp, essentially creating a position where Spencer would have to work through me to manage the supply relationship he'd tried to destroy. "The consulting arrangement is interesting," Harrison said carefully. "What would your role involve?" "Supply chain optimization, vendor relationship management, and operational efficiency analysis," I replied. "Essentially the same functions I performed as your operations manager, but now as an external consultant representing Mid-State's interests while ensuring Dynacorp's production requirements are met efficiently." Harrison understood immediately. His son had created a situation where the company would pay more for components and consulting services to get back the operational expertise they had eliminated through restructuring. The alternative was production delays, customer complaints, and potential contract cancellations that would cost far more than my previous salary. "I'll need to discuss this with Spencer and our finance team," Harrison said. "Of course. But I should mention that TechFlow Industries is planning a facility visit Thursday to discuss a potential exclusive supply agreement. If Dynacorp wants to maintain priority status with Mid-State, we'll need commitment on terms by Wednesday afternoon." Thursday morning, I received a signed contract accepting the consulting arrangement with competitive component pricing and a $2,500 monthly consulting fee. Spencer's signature was notably absent from the document, but his father's acceptance represented corporate approval of the new operational structure. The real satisfaction came Friday when I arrived at Dynacorp for my first day as Mid-State's strategic consultant. Spencer stood in the lobby, watching me badge in as a vendor representative with security privileges that exceeded his own. His expression carried the bitter recognition of someone who'd shot themselves in the foot and handed the gun to their target. "Good morning, Spencer," I said with professional courtesy. "I'm looking forward to optimizing our supply chain partnership." Spencer's response was barely audible. "This isn't over, Todd." "You're absolutely right," I replied. "This is just the beginning of a long-term strategic partnership that will benefit both organizations. I'm confident we'll achieve operational excellence together." Over the following months, my position as Mid-State's strategic consultant evolved into exactly the operational control I'd demonstrated during my 20-year career at Dynacorp. Every component specification, delivery schedule, and quality requirement flowed through my oversight, while Spencer found himself relegated to administrative tasks that kept him away from critical supply chain decisions. The financial results spoke for themselves. Mid-State's revenue increased 40% within 6 months through expanded customer relationships and operational efficiency improvements. My consulting fees, combined with ownership dividends, generated more annual income than my previous salary. Dynacorp's component costs increased 25%, but their production reliability improved significantly under my strategic supervision. Spencer's position at Dynacorp gradually shifted from executive liaison to project coordinator, corporate terminology for assignments that keep problem employees busy without giving them decision-making authority. His desk moved from the executive floor to a shared workspace near the shipping department, and his email signature cycled through increasingly generic titles like Business Development Associate and Operations Support Specialist. The most satisfying element wasn't financial revenge or professional vindication. It was the systematic demonstration that operational expertise and strategic thinking would always triumph over MBA theories and nepotistic assumptions. Spencer had confused cost-cutting with value creation, and his education in business reality would continue for years through every component delivery and quality inspection that bore my approval. 6 months after my termination, I owned a thriving manufacturing business, earned more than my previous salary through consulting fees, and maintained strategic control over the supply chain Spencer had tried to optimize through my elimination. Meanwhile, Spencer continued learning expensive lessons about the difference between theoretical business knowledge and practical operational competence. The final validation came when Robert Harrison offered me a permanent position as Vice President of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to him with oversight authority for all supply chain relationships. I declined politely, noting that my current role as Mid-State's majority owner and strategic consultant provided better opportunities for professional growth and financial advancement. Today, Mid-State Plastics operates facilities in 3 states, serves 12 major clients, and generates over $3 million in annual revenue. Spencer Harrison works as a project manager at a consulting firm in another city, having learned that some lessons in strategic thinking are too expensive to repeat. His father occasionally calls to discuss operational challenges, conversations that always include appreciation for the supply chain expertise he once considered redundant. The lesson remains clear. Underestimate operational expertise at your own peril, because the people who build the systems understand exactly how to leverage them when dismissed by those who only read about business in textbooks.